Hello, my name is Sean Brown from SECS, and in this WiSen video I'm going to showcase how you can set the initial null for a node installed on site. So for this example project, I'm just going to focus in on a particular node of interest, and this will be the serial number ending in BD. So typically a user has installed a node on site, and obviously the initial values after switching on will be arbitrary. They will not be defined from a null reference value, and you can see this with the values I have on the A and the B axis. I would also recommend that during this process that the T interval, the reading rate, is set to something similar to 1 or 2, 3 minutes, so that any change that you make is reflected in near real time. So you've proven that the system is taking account for your setting change. And lastly, the display units. So obviously here I'm reviewing my units in millimeters per meter. So the next stage will be go to setup, node offset and recalculation, and pick the node of interest, BD, and setting plus. Now if this is a new project where this is the first time the node has been switched on or installed, you will have default absolute offset values as 0. Now the important thing here is to remember that if this is a historic project and the same node has been moved and reinstalled, you've previously nulled it. Therefore, you obviously have an existing absolute offset applied in the past. Now, if this is not cancelled and reset to raw data with this button you can see just here, then essentially, if you were to follow the process I'm about to show you, you are adding an offset on top of an offset. And in principle, the process would be to press reset to raw data. You then have a period of time for which you'd like to set the node back to its raw data, and you might go back and do that for the very first epoch period when it's switched on. And once you've done this timestamp period, the important thing is to press calculate, and obviously what this is doing in the background is removing the existing absolute offset, so it is back to a 0 reference point. Now that is quite important just to understand. Now in this example I don't need this, so I'll just delete this entry and show you just for the A-axis, because here you can do multiple attributes at the same time, but in this example I'm just going to do the axis. I'll go into the axis. You have information text at the top which you can read to understand the process, and you can add a offset calculation that you're about to undertake. Now you have a default display graph showing you the resultant value as it is. So this in essence would be your raw value, because you have not applied an offset to this data set yet. And you can kind of see that through any value on the left hand x-axis. And typically you're in a kind of baselining or commissioning period after install. Now that length of time is dictated by a specification typically, but it's advisable to have a suitable baseline period which covers any seasonal variation. So I'll just go back in time for this example node, and you can see here that it was first switched on the 11th of March 2020. Press OK and press plot, and you will see a much larger data set. Okay, so now you can see all the data, and obviously what you're seeing here is cyclic behavior, and the important thing here is to note the axis and also obviously the units that you're looking at the data in. So looking at this data set, the next stage is to kind of review it in terms of any outliers or any bad data sets you don't want to use in order to calculate your null reference value. Now I'm quite happy with this data set, to be honest, so I'm going to use the whole epoch period you see. So if I scroll down, the first question it's asking you is, which period of data would you like to use to define your null period? Now, I'm going to click the value on the far left-hand side, and I'm going to click the value on the far right-hand side. Now, the current resultant value is what you see on the screen, and how you want to calculate that value you see being displayed is your personal choice. So you have a few options. You can either pick a single point within that data set, you can have an average over that data set, or you can use a median. So that's the middle value. So that's quite useful if you have any outliers in which they will be disregarded, and essentially you'll have that middle value being selected. Now for my example, I'm just going to pick the average. You have a second pop-up screen in which it automatically defaults and pulls the offset time period as your reference start and as your reference end. Now, if you're not happy with that time interval period, you can obviously click into these boxes and change that time. And what you're seeing here is minus 8.0287 is an average value over that period. Now, if you're happy for that to become your null reference and zero reference point going forward, then it's just a case of saying, well, my target resultant value is 0. And the most critical thing here is you apply this to future data. So that concludes the steps you need to carry out here. Now, if you tick the B axis, that would be obviously something you would do at the same stage here. So add new offset is the next step to take, and press confirm. So you're brought through to a summary page in which, if you press the after offset button, it will then show you where the resultant value will then sit after that offset is applied. And as you can see, that is what I'm looking to achieve. So the next stage is obviously to click confirm. Just one thing to note here, if you wanted to review or make any changes to the steps you were just undertaken, then modify will take you back to let you make those changes. So I press confirm, and you can see on this secondary summary box is the absolute offset is going to become the value that was just calculated as an average over that time period. Now, if I was going to undertake the B, then obviously I can go into B and undertake the B, and obviously I can do lots of other nodes as well at the same time. Once you've then undertaken all this initial offsetting, the next stage and most critical one is make sure you press calculate. And here you have a little status symbol saying that for the 8,429 records, these are being calculated and offsetted based upon the value you had defined. So I'll come back to this once it's calculated. Okay, you can now see that the calculation has taken place and has been completed. And we'll just go back and review the table display. And node of interest I was looking at was BD, and you can now see that the A-axis value is 0.0873. So obviously that is the current value subtracted from the averaged null value you had predefined. So remember here, you are not necessarily going to have a instantaneous 0 value. This is the difference to the averaged value you've taken over that whole time range. And that concludes the null setting within WiSen.